Hello and welcome to this Norsepower panel discussion entitled Going Beyond Compliance. Thank you very much for joining us wherever you are. As most of you I'm sure will know, given your interest in this panel, shipping is facing an unprecedented challenge right now in terms of meeting the demands of the energy transition and decarbonising. And that will require investment in order to meet compliance with the IMO's EEXI, CII, which we will explore today, but also more disruptive technology is highly likely in the shape of the EU's Fit for 55 and the likelihood of ETS. And then on top of that, there are increasing outside demand pull pressures on ship owners and operators, driven in many cases by an increased focus on ESG that is potentially driving a sentiment that requires looking beyond compliance. And that's today's topic. And I'm delighted to welcome our panel today. Some of you may know Thomas Risky. Thomas is the CEO of Norsepower. I'm delighted that we're also joined by Aude Leblanc. Aude is the technology leader for sustainable shipping at Bureau Veritas Marine and Offshore. Chris Fimberger. Chris is sustainability manager at RightShip. And Gavin Allwright. Gavin is Secretary General of the International Windship Association. Thank you very much, guys, for joining us. And I'd like to open up straight away. And just quickly before I do, there is a Q&A feed. We really encourage you as the audience to contribute to this. We envisage having some discussion for maybe 25, 30 minutes before opening the floor up to questions from the audience. So please do put your questions in the Q&A feed as we go along, and we'll make sure we try and get through as many of those as we can. So the first question is really, if I may, to Thomas, and then I'd like to bring you in, Aude. We obviously are hearing a tremendous amount about EEXI and CII. And I think it was DNV that estimated that over 80% of current vessels will have to spend money on upgrading, retrofitting their ships. I'd love to hear sort of your thoughts on what that means for innovative clean technology and in particular wind propulsion. If I could start with you, Thomas.
Okay. Thank you. Good question. I think the entire market is really awaiting for the EEXI and CII to enter the market, and it will be interesting to see how ships are done compliant. I really see that now there's a good chance to make ships compliant with these new requirements without derating the main engine, without reducing the service speed, by implementing these innovative green technologies, including, for example, Norsepower's Rotor Sails. I really hope that this is how the compliance is targeted by shipping companies and charterers.
And presumably, you know, I think you've always said that the rotor sails can be complementary to other technologies as well. It's not necessarily a case of fit one technology. There's the opportunity to potentially invest in multiple technologies.
That's absolutely correct. Innovative ship owners are combining different technologies to become compliant. I think in quite many cases, just one technology can be used to reach the compliance, but we will certainly see a lot of innovative ships even combining these and going even further because of these ESG targets and other mechanisms on the market.
Thank you. And to bring you in, what are you seeing from a classification perspective? Thomas touched on this just now. You know, there's this sort of conjecture that a lot of ship owners will invest in derating the engine, but there's so much innovative technology like the rotor sails out there. What do you think? You know, what are you seeing in terms of the discussions you're having with ship owners on EEXI and CII compliance?
For now, our discussion with the ship owner about the compliance with EEXI and CII is that they investigate all the solutions to reduce the emission and to be in compliance with this index. And so the wind propulsion and rotor sail are a solution which is considered, and it's generally they consider a mix of solution. And so rotor sails or wind propulsion with another solution as derating the engines or different alternative fuels.
Yeah, and I guess that's great to hear. That goes back to the point around sort of looking at multiple options simultaneously. There's not necessarily one silver bullet. Chris, I'd like to bring you in because I know on the RightShip GHG rating, you see a lot of upgrades and you track them and that can improve your rating as well. So I'm wondering whether, you've seen the sort of effect of the impending EEXI and CII coming in yet, and then sort of what sort of trends, what sort of technologies are you seeing being invested in?
Thanks, Al. Yeah, we've got our database of more than 50,000 ships from bulk carriers, tankers, container ships, and so on. And say 2 or 3 years ago, we'd see a couple of hundred retrofits and upgrades be registered to improve their ratings in our platform. Say in the last 12 months, more than 1,000 upgrades. So we can just see this skyrocketing in terms of those numbers. And I think it's driven by the fact that the owners can see the requirement to not only invest in one technology, but potentially many. And one that we are seeing, probably a few years ago, wind was seen as, oh yeah, that's nice to have. Whereas wind technology now is probably one of the most talked about topics at the moment, because of the numbers that you can improve your efficiency by. You're talking about double digits rather than a lot of the other technologies are sort of single, 5% or whatever it is. So wind technology can get up over 10%. So they're really strong interest in that area.
Thanks, Chris. And Gavin, I'd like to bring you in and welcome your comments on EEXI and CII and how you see wind technology helping with compliance, but also sort of broadening that out to as I mentioned earlier, the likelihood, almost inevitable ETS coming from the EU, and how that might impact behavior patterns and strategy for ship owners and operators looking ahead at the next few years.
Yeah, thanks, Alistair, and thanks for inviting me onto the panel today. Yeah, I think there is an evolution in or an evolving perspective around wind propulsion and around what it can actually do and what it can deliver. One of the aspects around CII especially is, if you, EEXI is of course in here as well. If you are implementing an EPL or you're derating your engines, there's quite a bit of siloed thinking around, or there has been quite a lot of siloed thinking around, well, if I'm derating the engine, I'm complying to this, to EEXI or to some CII aspects. But what hasn't been factored in is when you're actually reducing your speed, you're actually increasing the percentage that wind can be within that component, within that energy mix. And that is a critical difference that hasn't really been appreciated before. Also, you've got the option with wind to actually maintain a higher speed, but by using the same amount of fuel. So there are components here. We then put in something like wind routing as well, and then you can actually be further optimizing the wind component there. And again, that hasn't really been appreciated previously. And we've got some submissions at IMO around the EDI, which is going to be forming the basis of the EEXI, to really take a look at this as a substantial contribution, but also opening that out. And I think we're seeing that also in the EU, and it is when, for example, when the Fuel EU maritime proposal was put out, it was 100% fuel focused. And we challenged that. We went to them and said, look, you've got to widen this out, widen the argument out. Otherwise, you're missing a tremendous energy provision technology, and not just wind, but wave and solar as well. But also, you'll be creating a framework that could exclude these technologies coming in over the next few years, and that lock-in is a big concern of ours, and it should be a very big concern for the industry. So we've been able to open the door to this. It needs more ambition, we feel, within the EU and within IMO, but we're working on that, and incrementally it's improving.
Thanks, Gavin. And just to round up on that one, if I can bring you back in, Thomas, we heard a lot, obviously, about Maersk's order of new methanol ships. I've heard suggestions that the fuel costs could be certainly, when based on the energy output of the fuel, as much as say 3 or 4 times current fuel costs. Doesn't that just reiterate the argument for clean technology for energy efficiency?
I definitely see that it does reiterate that one. If we triple or 4 times the fuel cost today, that will do the same in other way around for the paybacks for any green technologies. So I think that it's evident that if this expensive carbon neutral fuels are entering to the market, there will be all possible measures taken to minimize the actual fuel consumption. And in that stage, we will need mechanical sails and all other innovative green technologies which are entering the market today. And also the EU ETS, which was mentioned already. If we, for example, imagine a carbon price of $100 per ton, that's more than $300 per metric ton of ship fuel. So also that would mean an increase on the energy price of, let's say, 70 or 80% from the current level. Also, that would slash the paybacks of any innovative green technologies which are close to being market mature today. So I think we will see a lot of changes on the market based on these changes, and a lot of these technologies entering the market very fast.
Thanks very much, Thomas. And I'd like to move on. Go back to you, Chris, now, if I may. And RightShip has always been able to sort of utilize, if you like, pressure from charterers in terms of influencing ship owner operator behavior with your ratings, both on the vetting side and the GHG side, of course. And we're increasingly hearing more and more about the influence of Poseidon Principle, Sea Cargo Charter, these outside influences. I think Maersk even referenced that as part of their decision on the methanol ships a couple of weeks ago. Putting that all together and then thinking about wind and weather routing as well, what sort of, how is that potentially influencing what routes and what sort of voyage planning owners and operators are taking? Because I know you guys track a lot of that.
Yeah, well, I think it comes back to the charter's desire now. Like, they're getting pressure from all sides to understand the amount of carbon in their supply chain. Historically, wasn't so much their problem, but that's coming more and more. And whether it's through the ballast, where they ballast vessels in from, what routes they're taking, how they operate the vessels, that's coming more and more, and that's something we're working with charterers a lot more on in terms of their supply chain emissions and trying to understand those. And that drives a lot of that demand back to the technology and working with the ship owners and operators to say, well, we're happy to charter these vessels and look to improve them over time. And some charterers, for example, are working with the owners and they're paying for retrofits and pushing down that path. So whether it's the weather routing or whether it's actual pieces of tech on the vessels, they're sort of putting their hand in their own pocket and investing long term, particularly with long term charters. So we're just seeing that grow more and more, and it all comes back to that pressure that's coming, whether it's from the shareholders, their board, or public pressure. They're basically having to demonstrate how they're reducing the CO2 in their supply chain, and that's definitely key from where we come from in terms of providing some of those services.
Thanks, Chris. And Gavin, maybe bringing you in from, we always talked about the importance of charters and shippers being an important stakeholder, but it feels that's heightening all the time. Obviously, the old message around charters pay for a lot of the fuel for many vessels, but also now adding to that the sort of pressures of ESG, as Chris has just alluded to. What are you seeing in the Windship Association on the charter shipper influence, Gavin?
Yeah, I would say over the last year or so, I'm getting less ship owners contacting me, more of the charterers contacting me and saying what is available. They're struggling to get a grasp of exactly what the whole technology basket is and the potential for that. But I think the title of this webinar of Beyond Compliance, I think that they're looking at the opportunities here and saying, well, actually, this could make our supply chains compliant right into the next decade. And I think ship owners certainly are looking at this and saying, yeah, do I want to be making incremental changes of 1 or 2% every year, or 3% to make it compliant with CII going forward, or just make that much larger jump towards something that's beyond compliance and get on with the business that we do best, which is moving stuff around as efficiently as we can. The charterers certainly are now pushing this. Some of them are entering into pilot projects with our members as well. And it's been a noticeable change, and ESG is certainly. I think a lot of people thought it would be maybe a bolt-on, just as sustainability has been over the last few years. I think it's really starting to bite into the central decision-making on all levels. And that's a fundamental change.
Thanks, Gavin. And Thomas, maybe bring you in again without giving away any state secrets. I mean, are you finding that you're having conversations with different players now, charters, shippers, as well as the traditional owner-operator?
I'm somehow seeing that the pressure to decarbonize shipping, it's coming from all sectors and all levels of the dialogue nowadays. So it's in the end each consumer who is starting to require that cargo is transported in carbon neutral way. By the way, been extremely happy to see our latest experiences, for example, Norwegian Rotor ship Sea Cargo Connector, where we fitted 2 giant rotor sails on board, and it seems like we are able to reduce the average emissions by up to 25% with this technology. So this is kind of impressive feelings from the market and things which we can do today with modern technology, which seem to be encouraging also customers and governments and other sectors to require for this kind of technology. And this is, I think, very, very positive news from the market. Impressive technology being demonstrated in a successful way and demand growing to transport cargo in a carbon efficient way.
Thanks, Thomas. And coming back to you, Odd, I mean, Class has traditionally always served ship owners. You're there to provide verification and seaworthiness and safety. But as we've just been hearing, things are moving and different players are entering the market. There are different influences, and a lot of that requires collaboration. And I'm just curious from a Class society perspective, how perhaps what you are seeing, or asking you what you are seeing, and are you seeing some changing patterns? Are you finding that you're having more collaborative conversations with owners, operators, and charterers, for example?
Yeah, with this requirements about emissions, we see more discussion, more collaborative discussion between us and ship owner and also the charter, because when we speak about emission and performance, we are also faced with the hesitation with unconfidence from the ship owners into the data given by designer or the designers of the technology. And so now we are in a phase where the prototype are tested and the demonstration, it's more a demonstration phase. And so as a classification society, we have a neutral view, and so ship owners come to us in order to have a good view about the technology and the different technology, and to be sure to have the good data in order to make a choice between different solutions.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about that is that data was probably traditionally only something the asset owner looked at, right? And maybe the ship management company or the operator, but you sense that some of these decisions that are being made around investment in large scale clean technology and new fuels as well are more collaborative, that there are other influences there for sure. And just to summarize around sort of these outside influences, Gavin, we talked a lot about ESG, but yourself and Thomas also referenced the fact that fuel prices, whether that's new low carbon fuels or levies or tax, are only going one direction. And are we kidding ourselves? Is really the cost of fuel ultimately going to be the thing that drives this most? Or do you feel that, as you mentioned earlier, ESG really does have an increasing influence?
I think it depends on the sector to a degree, but I think that the ESG creates a kind of a baseline that's rising, so that the tide is rising there. So consumer facing I'd say consumer facing shipping segments are going to be more susceptible to that and more influenced by that. I think the bulker sector, or maybe the tanker markets, are less driven by those changes. Price is always going to be a major factor here, but interestingly, if there is a carbon price, there's a lot of argument about how damaging that could be, but it does affect everybody. I think what will be key is that if that's equitable and if those proceeds are used for installations, so having a circular tax that comes back into the industry and is used for R&D or is used for installations, that there's an equitable spread of that. The one other thing I'd just like to say is that there's also a sort of new front that's opening up, which is the charter agreements and all of the legal aspects around operations. Because if you want to reduce your fuel consumption, and you wanted to wind route your vessels, that creates tensions within the whole charter agreement aspects, and delivery times, all of these points. So we're looking quite in detail about this over the next coming months to see what needs to be changed, and then start to make some recommendations around that.
Thanks, Gavin. Just moving on to the last section then, before we open this out to the audience. And I would stress that we'd really love to hear your questions or comments. Please just type away in the Q&A box on your screen. Hopefully that's fairly self-explanatory. Just going back to wind propulsion for a moment, and meeting compliance, but then also going beyond that with the demands from the outside that we've been discussing. Thomas, are you seeing that banks and financiers are picking this up? Are they being distracted by new fuels, or do you feel like they understand the impact that some of these new innovative technologies like the Flettner rotors can make?
Well, typically we are not in the position to see those financial deals between the banks and charterers. I hope and see that they are becoming based on Poseidon principles and those kind of items. But what we do see already on the market is that we are having more and more dialogues with these financial institutions. They are very interested in the technology. They want to understand what kind of contribution we can make to the value chain of shipping by reducing carbon emissions and other ones. And we are receiving a lot of positive signals that they really want to finance ships which are containing these innovative green technologies and enable reducing the carbon footprint. So that's kind of part of the chain. We are seeing increased customer demand and increased interest on the side of financial institutions. Just to mention what we can do for the CII and EEXI, as we have demonstrated in the best cases, we can reduce the average emissions of the ship by more than 20%. In typical cases, when we calculate the EEXI indexes, we can make the value better between 5 and 10%. So only an investment in Rotor Sails can enable a ship to reach compliance with those indexes. And same applies to the CII. They can probably change their rating between those rating classes by making this kind of investment in environmental green technologies.
Chris, that's a good segue to you as well. I mean, you mentioned earlier that you're seeing wind really sort of emerge in the last sort of year or two. It strikes me that in terms of your ratings, but also CII, which is obviously closely linked to what you've been doing, it has a role to play. But is that understood, I guess, is the question.
I think the market's still trying to work out exactly what it means. I feel like the market's got good understanding of EEXI. It's very linked to what we've been doing for the last 9 years with our GHG rating. Basically, it is tacit approval of our rating. We've been working in the industry for that transparency. There are some differences in terms of we don't promote or push engine power limitations. We think innovation is the key, and we're working through that at the moment. And I think that comes back to your point around, it's wind and these other things that are driving, because they're big numbers that you can actually get improvements on. So I think that's where most of the owners are trying to understand at the moment. And I think the other point about the CII is, like, EEXI is pretty well understood that most ships have to do something, and it's usually an EPL, I think. But with the CII, that's sort of the underlying one that is less well known, and I think owners are going to struggle more to get the really good ratings that they're after. And I think that's where they're going to push for these larger technology pieces and to really improve their ships or send them off to scrap and go back to the start. So it's going to be really interesting over the next couple of years to see how that pushes the market. And I think it really will. And I think particularly when charterers start to get quite picky about the different vessels they're chartering and what those ratings are in terms of the CII component.
Thanks so much, Chris. And just finally, because we're getting a few questions coming through to you, Odd, are you from a BV perspective seeing some of these, to use Chris's phrase, sort of big items, big pieces of often quite new innovative technology being explored? Have we moved on from sort of boss cap fins and small investments? And do you feel that the ship owning community is starting to really explore how it's going to go about complying and potentially even further?
Ship owner really explore new technology and innovating solution in order to be in compliance, because the index EEXI and CII are very ambitious, and the ship owner has to take some adaptation to their ship in order to be in compliance. So they push the market to develop technology with good performance, and so they they push to develop the technology, and they push the market to be in development. Yes,
that's encouraging to hear. Thank you. So just opening it up, there's a question. First question I'm going to take here. Do you see charterers will have an indirect emissions reporting obligation? If yes, how is double counting reporting going to be managed, as ship owners will have to meet MRV EU and IMO DCS reporting obligations? Gavin, you're nodding there. Can I bring you in on that one? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, in that sense, it does make sense that there are a number of reporting requirements, and of course, with CII, you also have if you're non-compliant, you have to enter that all into your SIMP reporting as well. I think it's 1 year at E level and 3 years on the trot at D level. So those reporting requirements, if other national or regional players start to implement their own requirements, as part, for example, as part of their national compliance that they're going to be reporting at COP26, that creates a whole patchwork of reporting that's going to be incredibly difficult to pick all the way through. I mean, one thing with CII and EEXI is, and especially CII, is it's based on the DCS, not on the more specific MRV or more like an EEOI operational index, which is more specified on the cargo. So I think that's probably the worst case scenario, if we have multiple levels of reporting, multiple levels of compliance. I would expect there to be more convergence around IMO.
That certainly was, that history would suggest that they'll kind of work it out in the end, right? EU and
eventually,
IMO. Yeah. And there's a similar question, and I'd like to bring you in on this, Chris, which is looking at CII. What kind of impact can ship owners expect if they get a D or E rating? Now, you may not know this, but I think your answer would be interesting anyway, given your background. Currently, there does not seem to be any clear regulation from IMO on what would happen. So, for example, not being able to trade the vessel. Got any idea on that one, Chris?
Yeah, I think we've got good history in this, and I think basically the CII coming in and using similar type rating to what we've been using for 9 years, except they've dropped the F&G rating, which is one that generally ship owners have trouble with the charterer requirements. But I think the charterers will just move up a rung and look to exclude DNE ratings from their supply chains. I think it'll be more of a market mechanism. I think at the moment there's no sort of, like there's pieces in the SEMP, and so like you mentioned, Gavin, but it doesn't seem to have a lot of bite at the moment. I think what it's doing is allowing the ship owners for a number of years to trade these vessels until a certain time, and playing devil's advocate a little bit, they can just trade them for a number of years, have poor ratings, and then scrap them whenever that is, and move on to the next vessel. Like that's sort of looking from a cynical perspective, but this is how the market moves and works, doesn't it? It's sort of a piece there. So I think what we want to see is that mechanism to enforce it, and also I think the market will enforce it in a way, in terms of, we've seen it for years, charterers want a certain type of vessel, certain quality, and whether they get that through RightShip or directly from the market, they're really going to push that agenda, I think. And I think that the owners and operators that have invested in the really good ships that are really efficient with good technology on there will be rewarded, and we're seeing it currently in the market, and it's just going to increase with CII coming in as well.
Thanks, Chris.
Alistair, could I just add something to what Chris has just said?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I'm sure Chris will correct me if I'm wrong, but those lower ranked ships are going to be generally the older vessels anyway. but it's interesting. I wonder if this could actually be driving a more modular approach or even leasing approach for equipment. Because if you've got an old ship, do you really want to be spending out a large amount on a heavy capex installation? If you had the option to lease, say, Flettner rotors on, or a containerized system with some wind propulsion on there to extend the life of that vessel and make her compliant up to, say, a D rating or an C rating, that could be a very interesting market direction that we could be seeing.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks very much for that one. Just one for you, and sorry, just going back to that quickly, I think, with the A to G rating that RightShip always had, Chris, it was always about exposing those left behind and almost allowing market dynamics to take care of them, right? And to your point, Thomas, I guess this is one for you. The double-digit savings that you referenced, and I know you referenced 25%, which I'm sure everyone was alerted to. Are they for a complete transit, or rather a snapshot of a specific operating point? I guess it's more, maybe to rephrase that, it's more, is that an average saving, or is that just an ideal wind conditions?
Yeah, very good question. When we refer to any savings percentages with our rotor sales, we always refer to long-term averages. So there can be days when, for example, that Norwegian Rotor ship connector, they have been sailing with our rotor sails alone. Their record day has been that they reached service speed of 20 knots thanks to our rotor sails. With their main engine only, the maximum speed is around 13 knots for the same ship. So they can actually sail alone with these rotor sails. We could, and we do sometimes refer to these maximum speeds or 100% savings or something, but typically when talking about technology, we always refer to long-term averages, which you can expect and you can reach. So I'm serious with modern technologies like rotor sails. You can target average annual savings between 5 and 20% already today.
Thanks, Thomas. And there's a lot of interest naturally in the rotor sails, so apologies to Odd and Chris again, but it's probably one for you and Gavin. The next one, wind power is ideal for tankers and ro-ros, but container and dry bulk operators face an uphill challenge convincing ports to accept wind technology that might interfere with cargo operations. How do you convince ports to be more accepting of wind propulsion and ultimately shipyards to design new ships with wind propulsion? Maybe I go back to you, Gavin, and bring you in again, Thomas, after Gavin.
Yeah, I'll just make a quick comment on the area that Thomas was touching on as well. And I'd just like to remind anybody in the audience that's heard me talking about savings. We have to remember that we're talking about a motor ship operational profile as well. So often those savings are presented at, say, 8% or 10%, but no change has been made to the operational profile of the vessel. So if you reduce the speed, maybe you put in some weather routing for wind, then you can see those numbers increasing further. But so that's just a little segue there. On the question around port operations, what we're seeing is we're seeing our members increasingly coordinating with multiple stakeholders in this. So the ports are brought in quite early on to discuss air draft issues, to discuss stevedoring issues, the cranes, etc. Bulk carriers, we're seeing rail systems being adopted. We're seeing hinged systems, retractable systems that can be pulled out of the way of the port operations. The container ship is always a challenge because you've got limited deck space, but things like kites, which would be an off-deck solution, those are possible. And then we start to get down to that discussion of a trade-off between deck space and cargo and fuel use and the use of wind propulsion systems. So new designs, actually, that trade-off is limited, and we're starting to see larger designs being put together for the container ships. But I would say what has happened is the technology providers in association with all of the other stakeholders, are looking at retractable systems, movable systems, getting them away from those gantry cranes.
And Thomas, I know you have those retractable systems at Norsepower.
That's correct. We just in May this year fitted a ship chartered by Vale with 5 pieces of tilting rotor sails. It's a VLOC type bulk carrier trading between Brazil and China. So we have also implemented that kind of solution. What Gavin mentioned about container ships, I totally agree. So we can see that there are different wind propulsion technologies on the market. All of them are not yet market mature, but technology is developing all the time, and there will be different wind propulsion technologies for different ships. But what comes to container ship design, I actually hope that there will be some new design one day, so that there's actually a deck on top of the containers on which we could fit some sails. But I totally agree that we should invest in technologies which actually reduce the carbon emissions per cargo transported. So we shouldn't compromise any cargo space and then put sails instead. That's not an environmental investment.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, guys.
I'd just like to say that it seems to be a little bit of the blurring of the lines between what is a container ship and what is a Cape-sized bulker.
Yes, that seems to be the case in recent weeks. And Odd, I can bring you in here, and I'll just take a couple more questions from the audience before we conclude. There's one here. Ship owners and charters are notoriously risk averse when it comes to adopting new technology. I don't think that would be an unfair stereotype. How can stakeholders such as class societies help make wind propulsion more technically acceptable and mainstream? I think you're muted.
Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah. Sorry, I was muted. So, as a classification society, we play a role to support the ship owner to navigate with new regulations and so the so what is the main point of the question?
The question is, what can you as a class society do to make wind propulsion more acceptable and mainstream? Maybe you are already sort of pushing it. I'm not sure. Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense that as a classification society, we have a look on the technical aspect of the technology, and we put some assurance of the feasibility first, as the feasibility of the technology, and also as to confirm the technology, and the technology works as it would works, and we guarantee the risk for the environment and for the life and for the cargo. So it could be more confident for ship owners or for the financial and for all stakeholders to have a classification society behind this kind of technology.
Thank you so much. And a last one, actually, for you, Chris, if I may. We want to reduce hurdles as a society in terms of improving or rather meeting the challenge of the climate crisis. One example, one hurdle this gentleman suggests is having EEXI rating and a RightShip GHG rating on different platforms. Is it possible to harmonize such compliant mechanisms?
It's a big question that we get more than daily at the moment is what's happening as we move forward. Like I said earlier, basically we've pushed the market for 9 years, and the IMO's basically, I suppose, more or less copied what we've been doing for a long time. So, fantastic on that front, and the pace they moved. There's no doubt that we need to change what we're doing and how we're doing it. We've got plans in place, and that's coming down the way. What that looks like, we're still working through at the moment, but I think, I'm not sure, to be honest. I think EEXI is like is a number. I think it's the CII that's going to have the sort of teeth in the market and we're sort of working through about what that looks like. I think EEXI is basically just pushing everyone to a certain level, a reference line. It's not going to provide a lot of value, to be honest, long term. The CII component is where you want to be, and just limiting your engine is not innovative. It is basically just lowering your speed. So it's, some people call it a glorified speed limit. So I think in the future we know we have to change. We've got a lot of a couple of hundred charterers that use our rating. They want guidance and something while they're vetting ships to basically do that. So that's coming down the way. It's just we're working through the details of that, and there'll be more out in the market towards the end of this year.
Thanks so much, Chris. And thank you to all our panelists. Thanks to the audience. Some great questions there. I'm sorry we couldn't get through all of them. I think it's been really engaging. I've learned a lot. I think there's a general consensus here that compliance is one phase, and the opportunity to meet compliance with big ticket investment, to quote someone that mentioned that earlier, is there, absolutely there. And maybe there's a slight shift in approach whereby ship owners and operators are being more collaborative and looking at more major investment than the traditional sort of 2%. I mentioned sort of Boss Cap Fin or Mewis Duct earlier. It seems like there may be a shift around that. And that's partly because there are also these outside pressures. There's the impending ETS from the EU that will increase fuel prices. New low carbon fuels will increase in price. And so in order to future-proof a vessel, at least for 5, if not 10 or 15 years, it's clear that some major investment probably needs to take place. So I'd like to thank you all for your time. And I'm sure the debate will rage on. It's been really informative, and thanks again.
Thanks, Alistair.